Right, we're going holding by Book of Leviticus chapter 18 again. Want to walk around holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18. We're still in verse 2. Be there probably for a little bit. Again, want to walk around holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18, verse 2. And the Torah says by the Be'er Shem Moshe Lemor, God spoke to the Jewish people saying, the Be'er B'nai Yisrael v'Amart Alehem Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right, it says, speak to the Jewish people and say unto them, I am the Lord your God, or I am the eternal your God. So Rashi says, it means, I'm the one who spoke on Mount Sinai, right? I am the Lord your God, whose kingship you then accepted. So accept my decrees, says Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, or Judah the Prince, and he said, manifest is known to him in the days of Ezra, that they would ultimately revolt against restricting sexual relations, which is this whole chapter is all about. Therefore, he came to them with a decree, emphasized by the words, I am the Lord your God, understand well who is that imposes these decrees upon you, and the judge whose function is to punish, but also gives reward. So says Or Chaim Kadosh, speaking about him the last number of weeks, and we spoke last week. He said by David Melech, by King David himself, Psalms chapter 40, verse 9. He says, you should do the will of your gods. You should desire, keep the Torah within your loins, within your inside. So what does it mean? It means the person should be so attached until his heart is sort of flipped around and doing what the soul wants. So we spoke quite about this, about the heart, the mind disconnect, and why it's hard. Even 97% of the game is to know what to do, but otherwise seemingly, it's still a hard thing to actually do what you need to do. So he brings down further. And he says, I also want to explain in an introduction that I heard in the name of Rav Kadosh, great holy rabbi, Bari Luria, Rav Isaac Luria, blessed memory, right? The Arizal, known as the Arizal, who major commentary on Kabbalah, and he says the following. He says like this. So sometimes a person can change from good to evil by his nature. In other words, he can flip from being good to being bad and his nature, but doesn't know where it comes from. Right? He doesn't have a clue why all of a sudden he's drawn to X, Y, or Z that's not good for him. Right? That goes against what God wants. Right? Doesn't know why. Right? Doesn't know why that happens. So he himself wonders what happened. Why all of a sudden a person's got these tendencies. Right? These tendencies to do negative things. So he says, could be sometimes. Now, it's going to be pretty wild here. He says, sometimes a person eats something, and part of it is evil. What he eats, part of it is bad. I don't mean physically bad. Yeah, spiritually bad. Yeah, what does it mean? Either he says it's got some negative things in it, or maybe there's a bad soul in this fruit or whatever you're eating from a Gilgal, right? A reincarnated soul in this fruit or a vegetable or whatever he's eating because of their sicknesses, meaning the person themselves, obviously, person who does bad is considered sick, right? Spiritually sick. And that could have gone in the food. That could have caused something. So he says when this, evil soul goes into it, or the spark of evil goes in, right? Then when he eats it, what happens? He changes. It has an effect on the person, and he goes from being bad to being good. Or in other words, he's got, a lot of bad tendencies now. And most likely he's going to go in that direction. Now, whatever, we'll clarify this. But he says further that this idea of evil overcomes him. And person has to guard themselves against these quote unquote evil foods that have an effect on the soul. Again, it's talking about a Jew, obviously not a non-Jew. And he says that a person should still want to do what God wants. And that's what it means the Torah is within him. Mind-boggling idea. Mind-boggling idea. He says over here, quoting from the Arizal, obviously according to Kabbalah, what does he say? He said the person can be affected, right? Again, apply more to a Jew than a non-Jew, but a person can be affected by what he eats. Can have a negative effect, right? To what extent? He says to the extent where it affects the soul. Now, how's that work? First of all, he asked the question, let's just go back to the original question. He asked the question, how can it be that this person all of a sudden has these tendencies? He's got these negative tendencies that are going to pull him in the wrong direction. Now, if you tell me he already had it, he's already either born with it, or he did it to himself, it's one thing. Caused it upon himself. Very good. But here, he didn't do that. Here, he knows, let's say he knows he didn't do anything here. So he doesn't know why he's drawn to these things. He has no idea why he's drawn to these things. So he says, plausible explanation is, there's some evil got inside of him. And now it's playing havoc with his soul. Very good. Why? What happened? How to get in? Right? Better question. How to get in? So he says, one of two things. Either a person ate something that's bad. Again, not physically bad, necessarily. Not necessarily. Maybe ate a bug, I don't know. Maybe ate a bug he didn't know about. That affects him. Right, as Kuyakar says, when we talk about the laws of kashrus, that a person is what they eat. Right? But again, this applies to a Jew. It affects the Jew. It doesn't apply to a non-Jew. Right? Because you see, says the Kuyakar, that a non-Jew can eat whatever they want. Any creepy crawly thing, whatever, it doesn't affect them. So if it doesn't affect them, why would they want to eat it? Right? Sorry, why would they want to keep kosher? It doesn't affect them. Right? It has no effect on them. If it has no effect on them, then keeping kosher, people say, hey, I want to eat cleaner foods, cleaner animals. Yeah? I don't want to eat non-kosher animals. But again, what does the Kli Yakar say? It says it doesn't affect them. If it doesn't affect them, why would they do it? So get these super Noahites will say, I can do what I want. Yeah, I can do it. I'll get the mitzvah for it, maybe. Obligation? Certainly not. But again, what do you do with the Kli Yakar over here? Because the Kli Yakar says it doesn't affect you. It's like eating a placebo. You want to eat a placebo? Okay. No effect. No effect. So why would you do it? If you're in the process of conversion, different issue. Totally different issue. So either you ate something that affected you, again, talking about a Jew here, that affected you, or you ate something where part of the soul or a spark, let's say from a Gilgal, from a reincarnated soul, had to be punished, came back to this world. It was in the food you ate. Now, the Rizal was famous for being able to see souls in all kinds of things, in rocks, in trees, in food, or sometimes to get the soul, out of the food and get its tikkun, get it fixed up for whatever it needed to be there for. Made a nice, made a nice bracha, a nice blessing, and then the soul went out, got its tikkun, got fixed up. Yeah. So the soul can come back in this world in an inanimate object, come back as an animal, come back as a rock, can come back as a wall, come back as food, right? Come back, well, it goes into food, let's say. So what can happen? So he says the person ate it. And therefore he says, since that spark, that part of the soul, that evil soul went in, or the spark itself, caused them to flip from being bad to good. Yeah. Overnight. Right? Seemingly overnight. That's what it did. Right? That's what happened. That's a mind-boggling idea. How would a person know this? Right? A person would never know it. Impossible to know. Person doesn't feel it, per se. In other words, let's say better. They sense something, they don't know where it comes from. So they do feel it. Right? But they don't understand how can it be if they're going on a certain path and they're trying to do the right thing on a regular basis. How is it possible? How is it possible they flip the script, they go from good to bad? Now, I have a very simple answer. Might not be the right answer, right? But I got a very simple answer. A person's got an evil inclination, right? Moreno Rabbeinu, the Yetzar. He's got an evil inclination. Very good. Got an evil inclination. If he's got an evil inclination, can he go from good to bad overnight? Within 10 seconds, within a minute? Can a person all of a sudden, stray off the rails, go off the rails? He can do that. And we do that all the time. We go up and down. Very good. But here, he senses something else. What does he sense? He senses that he's on the right path. He's doing the right thing. He's going in the right way. But even though he's going in the right way, something feels off. He senses something. Something is off. And because something is off, what happens? He strays. Now, he doesn't know why. He doesn't have a clue why. So says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, it could be that something bad he ate, and that has an effect. Right? Part of the evil went into the food, has an effect. Or a spark or part of the soul of somebody that's bad goes into the food. Maybe that caused it. And therefore, that part of evil flipped him. Totally flipped the script. Yeah. So how does this work? $1 million question. right? We'll play Kabbalist for a second. How does this work? Now, we are affected, Jews are affected by what they eat. Someone's going to tell me, come on, science hasn't proven it. Very good. Science hasn't proven it. Now, does that mean it's not true? People swear by science, but there's a lot science doesn't know. There's a lot science has uncovered. True. Drop in the bucket compared to what's out there. They don't know. Again, people swear by science. Science has uncovered very little of what's out there. They've uncovered a lot, but the bigger scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. So just because someone uses as an argument, say, you want to claim, you have to keep kosher because you are what you eat. It does affect you. It causes the spirit to be dulled, the Gemara says. Right? It's a play off the words of the word tameh. The word tameh translated as being impure. So the Gemara says, don't read it, v'nin tamtem made you impure. Read it, v'nin tamtem. What does nitamtem mean? To dull the spirit. So anyone, a Jew, coming back, wants to come back to Judaism, what's the first thing we'll tell him to do? What's the first mitzvah we'll tell him to do? Is keep kosher. Start keeping kosher, get the garbage out of your system, because if you don't get the garbage out of your system, right, all the traits and whatever's there, you won't be able to listen to Torah. So you tell them to keep kosher and you tell them to keep Shabbos, right? They start keeping Shabbos. Now, why is Shabbos so crucial? Because what do we say every Friday night? We say Book of Genesis chapter 2, right? We say God stopped created Shabbos, very good. That's why we stand. We give testimony that what? We give testimony in the fact He created the world. Right? That's why a Jew, God forbid, doesn't keep Shabbos. Desecrate Shabbos desecrate Shabbos in public. It's got the status of a non-Jew. Now, we can always repent. But what's the problem? What's the serious problem? Someone desecrates Shabbos. There are a lot of ramifications. What's the biggest problem? Biggest problem is he denies God created the world. Denies God created the world. That's pretty severe. Right? You got to acknowledge God's absolute. Right? It's one of the 13 principles of the Rambam, of Maimonides. First principle. It says God's absolute. God doesn't change. All these are crucial for a Jew to be a Jew. Doesn't necessarily apply to non-Jews. I think there are things there that, non-Jews should believe in, but they're not obligated to. A Jew's obligated in all these things. He's got to believe God is unique. There's nobody like him in the world. There's reward and punishment, right? Moses, greatest of all prophets. The Torah has never changed. Coming to the Messiah, resurrection of the dead. These things are crucial. Absolutely crucial. Again, I think for a non-Jew, it's good to believe in many of them. They don't have to, though. But for a Jew, it's absolutely crucial. So what about God being absolute? God creating the world. Yeah, that's a serious thing. You deny that, you're out. I mean, any of these things you deny, you're out. Why is this more severe? Desecration of Shabbos, death penalty. Most severe death penalty. If a death penalty was ever given out. Most severe. Why? You deny God himself. You deny the fact that created the world. Yeah, so there's things you got to believe in. And you got to believe 100%. No doubts over here. So what do I have? What do I have beyond the shadow of a doubt? Right? We have two things. One, I got to acknowledge God's in charge of the world. But I also have to realize, a Jew has to realize the garbage they eat affects them. It affects them. Right? Timtu malev, as the Gemara says, means he's apathetic. Apathetic means it's like trying to start a Jeep with a 9-volt or a Humvee, right? We'll make it more modern. A Humvee with a 9-volt. You can try as much as you want. You ain't starting a Humvee with a 9-volt. You're not even starting a smaller car with a 9-volt, right? Ain't going to happen. And these people are totally apathetic, hardest people, I think. some of the hardest people to try and draw close to Torah. It's true, it's not true, this, that, they don't care. They don't want to hear it. They're not interested in being inconvenienced. That's not what they want. They want to live their lives. They want to be as animalistic as possible. That's what they want. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to hear about morality. They'll say you do what you want. You want to pray all day? I like to play golf. I like to do this. Okay. It's not about truth. And if you can prove it to them, they don't care. It's okay, so you proved it to me, so what? Who's intellectually honest today? Spoke about that last night in Pirkei Avos. Nobody, right? Met one in the last 30 years, 32 years. Met one intellectually honest person. Everyone else, a bunch of liars, a bunch of fakers. Yeah. So here, people bow down to science. Absolutely bow down to science. And science hasn't proven this. Very good. Science doesn't have what to say. So people say, see? The Holy Spirit, it affects the Jew. Yeah, what you eat, it affects them. Very good. Prove it. Show me in science. Yeah, I spoke last week or a few weeks ago about how can anyone really be an atheist today? Yeah, so the whole thing on Q&A, spoke about it. How there's just so much evidence that there's a God in the world. A God through design. That's how Abraham came on the scene at the age of 3, the age of 40, or later. So the person had like a whole laundry list. Why is agnostic? Okay, agnostic's a little bit better. At least agnostic says there might be a God. There might be a God, right? But I have many doubts. So this guy had a whole person, whatever. Whether it was a guy or a woman, I think it was a guy. But in general, had a whole laundry list. Whole laundry list of things. Yeah. And what was one of them? What would be an obvious one? Show God's in the world. Where is he? I don't see him. Never spoke. No evidence of his godliness in the world. Torah says very clear. You don't do what you're supposed to do. God will take himself out of this world. Be a world of hiddenness within hiddenness. That's what it is. Since the temple's been destroyed. We don't see God direct. It's very easy to see. Right? I mean, it's a big cop-out answer also. Brothers like, well, God's never spoken to me. Oh, maybe he hasn't directly come into your head and say, this is God. I created the world. Bow down to me. Okay. But if you open your eyes for a second and you look, as the host of would say, you look at nature. Yeah. And you look at the human body and how exact it is. It's impossible. It's random. Evolution goes out the window. Because even if you had all the mutations in the world, wouldn't come into what the human body is and how it functions, right? Different things, how the eyes work, how the insides work, all kinds of different things. He went into a whole thing about bees, what they do with pollen and all this. Photosynthesis, different things that are exact. They're absolutely exact. You want to say, like, it could have been random mutations over billions of years? That's kind of hard to say. I mean, it's a big leap of faith. Big leap of faith. Right? All these mutations, that's how you came up to such a perfect thing. Obviously, you don't want to say the Torah is true. I get it. Right? You don't want to say that, what the Bible says about creation. Okay. Well, you only have one other thing, and that's evolution. Right? But to say that the world is the way it is, just in the human body and nature. That's it. Just look at nature. Right? Forget the human body. Look at nature. It's precise. It's exact. So many things. You want to say they're all random mutations? That's how it happened? That's a big jump. That's a big jump. Abraham comes on the scene and he sees an orderly world. Everyone else, worshiping, their pocket gods. Here's Bob. Don't leave home without him. Everyone had their pocket gods. Yeah, and he convinced the world, convinced the masses, him and his wife. Him and Sarah convinced the masses. Idolatry is nothing. By design. no Kabbalah, no fancy things, even before God spoke to him. He's like, they're like, did God ever speak to you? No. At least at this point, God hadn't spoken to him. Okay. But he goes through systematically, proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that the world has to be ordered. Right? Now, I'm here sitting at a table, no one can see. Probably a good thing it's kind of messy. But in general, if you look at this table, or any table, what do you think? It fell out of heaven? Made itself. Made itself. Doesn't look like it made itself. Someone had to have created it. Someone made it. There's order. Seemingly there's order. A lot of times, very funny, just as a side point, here in Israel, you buy something, you put it together, no instructions. Right? Number of times you get something, it's like, they give you like, a picture of this, that, and that's it. Well, like no real instruction. You got to figure it out on your own. I don't know if it's just here, it could be other places also. It's, sometimes it's kind of funny because you got like, 500 pieces, and like, good luck. Let's see you put it together. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to digress here. Point being, right, this guy has a whole laundry list. Whole laundry list of things. So good. You'll tell me that's the obvious thing. Well, has God ever spoken to you? No. We're not prophets, no prophecy today. The only people who have prophecy today are little kids or imbeciles, as the Gemara says. No prophecy today, right? You have, the greatest rabbis generation have some form of prophecy, right? Called one of the lowest levels of prophecy, what we call divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. Everybody else not even close, right? Not even close. Now, so this is a good thing. Someone's going to throw out and think, see, maybe God does exist. Maybe. I'll throw out that possibility. Yeah. But if he exists, why hasn't he spoken to anyone? Why does he show himself? Why does he reveal himself? Why does he make it obvious? Well, he has that sometimes in history. God spoke to the Jewish people. They saw God at Mount Sinai. They felt God's presence during the first temple, not during the second temple period. Today it's gonzo. So a good point, right? Maybe it's a good point. God hasn't spoken to anyone. Good. Now, even if he hasn't right now. Right? Maybe it's very clear that's the case. But look at what's going on in the world. Look at the world itself. Some people say there has to be God in the world for one reason. The only reason there's a God, I shouldn't say the only reason. One reason that there's a God in the world is because there's a Jewish people that exist. We're 1/1000 more of the world's population. Been tortured, burned, exiled, all kinds of terrible things, and we're still here. We're still here. I remember when I was first married, went to Europe, and we're in Italy, and we're by the Arch of Titus, right? So, tour guide's saying, we're all the Romans. Look at all the things that the Romans did and destroyed and whatever, right? So everyone started singing Am Yisrael Chai in the middle of Rome, right? It was pretty funny. Jewish people live. So we're all the Romans. We're all the Byzantines. We're the Ottomans. We're the Greeks. Greeks aren't the same Greeks today, but we're all these nations, all these powerful nations. Gonzo. So what do you see beyond the shadow of a doubt? You start up with the Jewish people, you will disappear. You'll disappear. Jewish people will suffer, okay, but they will disappear. So all these great nations, had their day. 100 years in power, 50 years in power, 70 years in power, whatever it is. And the Jews have been tossed around like rag dolls all over, dispersed the four corners of the earth. But guess what? All these big countries and all these big world superpowers, gonzo. The Jewish people are still around. But not only still around, the impact they've made, in science, medicine, mathematics, literature, other things, won more Nobel Prizes exponentially than any other ethnic group. Mind-boggling. Even as a small population that we are. Now, what's the reason? Very simple reason. God put in the soul of every person, right, to search out for God. Very good. So Jews have an advantage because we accepted the Torah Mount Sinai. God gave us, extra aspects of our soul, right? If we do the right thing. So we're chosen, and that hasn't changed, no matter what anyone says. That hasn't changed. Now, you're supposed to use that soul, that insatiable soul, for Torah. And you're supposed to fill it with Torah. Now, what happens? You don't want to fill it with Torah. Let's say you want to fill it with garbage. Okay. So if the soul is insatiable, it needs something. Right? So, exponentially, Jews go to universities and higher level universities, quote unquote, probably more than anyone else. Right? Because education's a huge thing. The huge thing, certainly in secular Jewish families. They want them, they want to get a degree, at least a degree, even though, I think it's definitely overrated, having a degree, but that's a whole nother discussion. People have been brainwashed saying if you don't have a degree, you're not worth anything and you can't get a job. It's totally not true. Totally not true. But in any case, if you're not going to put your effort into Torah, and you're not going to work hard to expand the soul and to fill it with Torah, what are you going to fill it with? You fill it with garbage. Yeah? Fill it with science. You fill it with math. Okay. Someone will say, well, don't we need science? Don't we need math? Sure. Don't we need these innovations? Sure. Someone will invent them. Gotta put, give someone else the ability to do that. We don't necessarily have to do that. But if you're not in tune with Torah, what are you going to fill your soul with? What are you going to fill it with? Why is this desire, I think amongst Jews almost more than anyone else, or any ethnic group, about higher education? And everybody's like that. Of course you got to go to school. Now, if not, then a person will do other things. If they're not academically, inclined. Okay. But you have to ask the question, why exponentially, do you see Jews at the, upper echelons of university, going to the highfalutin, so to speak, university, not so great shakes to write about, because they're all anti-Semites, but nonetheless, they thrive in these places. They thrive in academia, whatever you want to call it. They thrive in these places. Why? Because they don't have Torah. So if you don't have Torah, what are you going to do? You have to apply something else, right? You have to, you have to put yourself into something else. So what are you going to do? What are you going to put yourself into? Studies. Yeah, then people go into business, so people do other things. But again, most people, because they drank the same Kool-Aid and got totally brainwashed, and people tell them 100%, you have to go to college. You have to have a degree. People paying small fortunes, send their kids to college, and then they can't do anything with it. Imagine like me, I got a liberal arts degree. What are you going to do with it? Say, so you can teach history. You can't teach history unless you have a master's. Okay. So could have gone on and get a master's in history. Very good. Okay. But most degrees you can't do anything with anyway. I heard someone once say, if I had a choice, someone has a degree or not a degree, most likely you choose someone that has a degree. Okay, so let's say one doesn't have a degree. One has life experience, greater life experience. They have greater life experience. You're taking the one with the degree. We're taking someone that's got more practical relevance to what the job needs to be done. Yeah, but again, it's probably in my humble estimation, whatever it's worth, probably one of the top 5 biggest lies, out there. You got Christianity, you got evolution, Palestinian people, that's probably top 3, right? Could be all 1A, 1 or 1A. Yeah, this is up there. This is either 4 or 5 biggest lies. 100%. Everyone's convinced, of course you need a degree. Tell a secular person, Jew or non-Jew. You're not going to college. They'll flip. Where are you not going to college? Where are you not going to get a degree? I can support yourself. I know so many people don't have degrees. They're doing quite fine. Yeah. Now, some things you need a degree for. Okay. Yeah. Not opposed to that. If you need a degree, you need a degree. Most things you don't need a degree for. Okay. Now, so the point is, if a Jew is not going to put themselves 100% into Torah, or 80% into Torah, what they're going to put themselves into? Secular things. 100% secular things. That's what they're going to do. So that's why they'll be the cream of the crop and all these other things. Because that's more important, right? Their parents, more important. For them to study, to learn, do something, right? Do something in the world. Now back to our point here. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh, of blessed memory, this person has now flipped the script. He's gone from good to bad, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't know what's driving that. Now you can say, well, maybe he's got mental health issues. Maybe, I don't know, saw something. Maybe he suffered from depression. Maybe, I don't know, any number of things. It could be. But he doesn't know where it comes from. All of a sudden, he's got these feelings. Where did it come from? Where in the world did it come from? So the Or Chaim HaKadosh here gives two reasons. Either something he ate, that had something bad in it that caused this, or a gilgul, right? Or somebody's soul goes into it, bad egg this soul, and cause them to think these other thoughts. Now you could say, well, maybe they had these thoughts anyway. Maybe they had these thoughts from before, right? But he's not entertaining that possibility. He's not saying, well, it came from their nature, came from their psyche, came from the intellects, as the Book of Leviticus would say. Maybe it came from that, maybe. It doesn't say that. He says he doesn't know where it came from. He's overcome by these feelings. These feelings themselves, he got no answer for. They came out of the blue. No mental health issues. Came out of the blue. So if it came out of the blue, where'd it come from? That's what he's asking. So he says either, again, something he ate, or the soul that went into it. And it affected him. Because really, as David HaMelech says King David again, Book of Psalms, chapter 40, verse 9, he wants to do the will of God. That's what he desires. And he wants to put the Torah within inside of him. And if you don't put the Torah inside of you, what are you going to put inside of you? Garbage. That's what you're going to put inside of you. So he says, and that's what it says. You want to do God's will. You want to put this inside of you. And if you don't put Torah inside of you, other things can go inside of you. And if other things go inside of you, what happens? Negative effect. Negative effect to the extent, again, it's not something you saw. It's not something you heard. It's not something that's part of your psyche. It's something that came from out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. And he doesn't know where it came from. Comes along the Or Chaim HaKadosh and says this is probably where it came from. Came from, one of these things. Now, based on that, we got a major question. And the major question is, how would I fight against this? How could I stop this from happening? You eat a piece of fruit, right? Piece of watermelon, a peach, a plum, whatever it is, right? A mango, right? You ate a mango, let's say. So again, the bad parts you'll take out of it, right? Grapes, you'll take some bad parts out of it. Very good. You'll take some bad parts out of it. Okay. So you won't eat them. Very good. So physically you won't be affected, right? You eat something that's going off or whatever, it can affect you physically. You can be sick. Very good. But how are you going to know? How in the world are you going to know? Or is your soul going to know that now all of a sudden something changed? Now today I would say it's probably harder, unless you're on a very high level. It's much harder to feel this because we sin all the time. We do things we shouldn't do. So it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be too hard to figure out. You saw something, you heard something, something still back in your psyche from 10 years ago, I don't know, something came out, and this is what you do. Right? This is the action that you did. You can't get rid of it. Very hard to get rid of it. It's part of the Yitzhar. It's part of the evil inclination. Okay. Yeah. So that's because of that, we don't know what we feel. Right? And a person is, we're just a mixture of cells. So we go up and down all the time. Not saying someone's got a mental health issue. We go up, up and down all the time. We hear things, see things, things that are good, things that are bad, up and down all the time. Different things. In fact, let's say it's very hot outside where let's say where you are. So the heat affects you. You're going to be hydrated, you can't be dehydrated. You got to take care of the body. Very good. So we're a mixture of so many things, right? It would be so easy to say, well, you feel off a little bit, but why? Why do you feel off? So it'd be very easy to say, we don't know what we're doing anyway, most of the time. We're affected by so many things, so it could be anything. Something you thought, something you saw, something you heard. Could be 1.5 million different things. Right? So today, this is a very hard thing to say, because unless the person's really in control, they're really in control, then I would say, okay, they're totally in control. And because they're totally in control, then something's off. Something obviously is off. That's affecting it. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here says, you know what? They're so affected by it, but they don't know where it comes from. They don't have a clue where it comes from. But they're affected by it. So now he answers, and he says, either you ate something that affected you, or it's from a guilt, from a reincarnated soul. Either case, we could easily say, why in the world, or how in the world are you going to fight against that? How are you going to prepare yourself against that? As we said, you eat a peach, a plum, an apple, a piece of watermelon, a grape, I don't know. You eat anything, you eat breads. You eat breads. All things being equal, I got to worry what's in it? I mean, conscious-wise, you do. Right? But I have to wonder something like some negative tendency went into the bread, and now it's going to affect me. So if you want to tell me hocus pocus, abracadabra, someone put a hex on it, someone did sorcery on it, and you ate it, that could have an effect. Right? That for sure could have an effect. Yeah. But otherwise, how would I know? How would I know in any case? I would never know. It would be an impossibility. It would be an impossibility to know. So if it's an impossibility to know, $1 million question is, you can't fight against that. This is impossible. I cannot fight against it. Nobody can fight against it. If nobody can fight against it, and that happens, then what's gonna be? There's no way to fight against it. God can't punish you. You're gonna say it's onus, it's not my fault. You ate something, you had no control whatsoever what's inside it. It's kosher. Thing is kosher. My apple, my peach, my plum, it's kosher. But it got affected somehow. Okay. What does that have to do with me? You're going to say, but you're affected. Very good. Even if you're affected, you have an easy claim. Your easy claim is nothing I could have done. It's an onus. It's beyond my control. Yeah? That would be your claim. Problem is, says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, It affects you. You are affected. If you're affected by it, what happens? It has a negative effect, right? So now you're feeling all these feelings. You have no idea where it came from. And now you're affected by it. This is something that came out of nowhere. Now, if a person goes in that direction, it's not their fault. Totally not their fault. They are now affected by it. Are they liable? Are they guilty? Seemingly, according to the Chaim Kadosh, they're guilty. But you had no way to fight against it. You had zero way to fight against it. Right? Famous Three Stooges line, I'm a victim of circumstance. Not my fault. This is what happened. You ate something, looked good, kosher, no problem. How am I supposed to know? There's something else going on with this piece of fruit. In spiritual terms. You have no idea. You have absolutely no idea. But this is the point. Again, we're not holding there. I don't think very few people are holding there. That a person all of a sudden, their soul is going to be lit up by something over here. Because they ate something. Yeah? They're not going to feel it. Most people probably wouldn't feel it. Because they're not on that level. There are some people like that. Most people probably not on that level. But there's a bigger question. You're going to tell me it's not my fault. I ate from it, look good. Now you're affected by it. But it's not my fault. Not my fault. So if you give in to that inclination and you ate from it, seemingly affects you. Once it affects you, start doing things. Now you're going to be liable. It's a mind-boggling thing. But what can a person claim? What obviously could they claim? They're honest. It's not their fault. So either they act on this thing after they die after 120 years, guys say, hey, look what we did over here. You did this, that, and the other thing. But then, you're shown what happens. You ate something you had no control over. What was inside it? You had no control. So you have a very easy claim. Your claim is going to be, you can't punish me for that. I was overcome and delirious with whatever it was that flipped my script in my soul. Whatever that was, it's not my fault. You can't blame me. Yeah? Says the Chaim HaKadosh over here, no. Why are you to blame? Because your soul now felt something. Since your soul felt it, didn't know where it came from. Okay? Fair enough. It did not know where it came from. Very good. Even if it didn't know where it came from, it affected you. Once it affected you, now how am I going to deal with it? See, this is catch-22. You had no control over it. Okay. Now the question is, you're affected. Now, once you're affected, or maybe infected, yeah? Once you're affected by it, now the question's going to be how'd you react? And this is with anything in life. Anything in life. We are throwing so many curveballs and so many different things that we never would have expected. Right? You know what to say, when you least expect it, right? And we never expect it. And a person would say, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what I wanted. But what did God want? Why did he put you through it? Why did he put you through the ringer? Right? What's one possible explanation? Because God wants to see how you're going to react. He's going to say, you're holding on to me or not? You giving up? You throwing in the towel or not? Yeah, it's about effects. What we're going to do. We didn't sign up for this. Through this trial, that trial, the other trial. Again, let's say you didn't do it to yourself. See, the Ramchal in Derech Hashem says, we have the ability to affect other things. Plants, animals, environment. Yeah? Animals are affected by us. Not the other way around. Yeah? They can't do anything outside their own will. Right? They can choose to eat, not to eat, whatever. They don't have free will. Right? Man's the only one that can affect other things. Very good. So I didn't ask for other people to affect me in this way. Or do this or do that. Very good. Right? Now let's say You're in a situation and you have no control. You have no control, and people do X, Y, and Z. Let's say, right? Let's say that's the case. Now, if that's the case, what is the question? What's the question going to be? The question's going to be, I'm stuck in this situation. They didn't do it to myself, right? We'll make it easy. You didn't do it to yourself. You didn't shoot yourself in the foot. Okay. So now you're going to ask, why do I have to go through this? What's the point of me going through this? I didn't ask for this. Very good. What's the answer? What's one answer? One answer is, question's going to be, how are you going to react now? That's the question. Because God's not going to throw you in a situation or put you in a situation you can't handle. Now, we may think we can't handle it. We may think it's impossible. But obviously, if we're being tested, God thinks we can do it. God thinks we have the ability no matter how difficult it is. But sometimes the whole question of the test is, what are you going to do now? How are you going to react? That is part, I don't think it's the whole test. So it may not be the whole test, but it may be part of the test. Because there are many things, many things, probably almost everything we have no control over, zero. We may think we have control, right? There are people out there who think they're God's gift to the world. They can do anything. They can even walk on water if they tried, right? They think they control all kinds of things. They're not in control. 100% they're not in control. God is controlling them. They're like puppets. They're not in control. They can't even control their own bowel movements, right? If they can't control their own body, which nobody can, essentially, right? You can't control your own body, then why do you think you're going to affect other things? People think that. They'll say, you're right, I can't control my own body, but I have power over other things. But who says? If you can't control this, who says you're in control of that? God is usually like a puppet. Right? Then we dig a little bit deeper. Are our thoughts really our own thoughts? Yeah? Is God just putting thoughts in our head or other people's heads and this and that? Right? Who are we really? Get down to the, nitty gritty of the soul and how it works and, whatever. Or, there are things we are in control of. What are we in control of? We are in control how we react. That's what we're in control of. Now you're going to say, a lot of people don't think about this. When something happens, what's the first thing they do? They don't think about it. They don't, think about what they're going to say. They don't analyze the situation. What's the first thing they do? Knee-jerk reaction. They say something. They do something. Whatever it is. Now, could be the right thing. I'll give people some credit. Maybe they did the right thing. But a lot of times, most likely, that reaction is going to be the wrong reaction. And they wish they could take it back. Now, why they react that way? Because that's what emotionally inside of them said to do. That is how they reacted. Now, again, I'm not judging any cases, and saying, oh, the person reacted wrongly this way, that way. I'm not talking about any specific cases. But in general, when a person reacts, they don't necessarily react with reason. Yeah, that's also something we got to be in control of. Something happens, it could be, let's say, a conglomeration of a lot of things. And at that point, the person pops. Why all of a sudden at that point, why they get to the breaking point, can't answer. But a lot of different things happen. One thing happened, another thing happened, a third thing happened. At some point, the person, gets fed up, and the reaction is totally disproportionate to what happened, to what someone said. But they're already at a certain point. They're already at, let's say, a certain breaking point, and at that point, they just flipped. They just flipped. Now, 9 times out of 10, that would have been the normal reaction. Now, it could be person just got fed up because of all the things that happened. It could be, a person sleep deprived, that, a person makes bad decisions that way because they're not at their best because they're sleep deprived, right? There could be a lot of different reasons. A lot of different reasons, but a lot of times people will say things and react to what someone else said, what their inflection was, but that's not the reality. That's not the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation, they should have answered like this. And this is part of the test This is part of the movie, the second movie, according to Kabbalah, that we're going to see after we die. The first movie is going to be what you did in your lifetime, right? That's what everyone says. They have an out-of-body experience. What's the first thing they see? They see their life flash before their eyes. So according to Kabbalah, there's the second movie. What's the second movie? Second movie is what you could have done. Okay, so God's now going to show you what you should have done. Now you're in this situation. God's going to say, look, you totally overreacted over here. Like 100% totally overreacted. This is what you should have done. Yeah, this is how you should have acted. This would have taken care of the situation. This would have led to this, that, the other thing. But you didn't. So a lot of times, I'm not saying always, right? But, a lot of times, the person's going to react in a situation not the way they would normally do if they thought it out. If they had a chance to think about it, they're thrown off. They got thrown off for whatever reason. And now, let's say they take a step back. Let's say they take a step back. They now take a step back and they say, wow, can't believe I did that. Can't believe I said that. Well, what's the reason they did it? Could be any number of reasons. Could be there were a whole bunch of things happened before and they just snapped. It could be, it could be, I don't know, just sick of the situation. But it's called the knee-jerk reaction. See, so a person will say, does God expect me to be cool, calm, and collected under all circumstances? Should never get mad. Should never get depressed. Should never get, we got what to work on. 100%. We all have what to work on. But, the more you're in control, so to speak, the more you see, as I would always say, the more you see the bigger picture, the easier it is in some ways to decipher if you're able to take yourself out of the pain and see the bigger picture. Now, sometimes the bigger picture looks pretty bleak. It doesn't look good. And a person will say it's not fair. And, people say all kinds of things. But I think one problem is, and I think this is true, and people can disagree, but, I think that when a person does something and they react, a lot of times not thought of. Probably many times they say something because they're just aggravated. Aggravate the person, aggravate the situation, different things, and they throw something out. But if they had a chance to mull it over. I'm not saying they had to speak it out with someone else, but whatever, they had a chance to think about it. I think if they would have had the chance to think about it, they would have reacted the same way. Maybe they'll say, no, I would have reacted the same way anyway. Okay. I think people get into trouble when they say something or they react and they should have kept their mouth shut before they said anything. And they reacted. Again, I'm not saying, a person doesn't get angry, person doesn't lose it, okay, but we have to be in control also. It's not an easy thing. I'm talking about just any test in general. But people say get sledgehammered so much makes you want to scream out. I get it, 100%. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying the person gets sledgehammered either, right? But usually I would think when someone says something, okay, you say they meant it. That's what they meant to say. But I would venture to say, if they had an opportunity to think about it and think about the repercussions of what they're going to say and what they're going to do, then it would come out probably somewhat different. Yeah? Now, some people say, no. In this situation, I would have done the same thing. Even if I would have thought about it, thought about the repercussions, I still would have done the same thing. Okay. I think what a lot of people do, though, is they react. They react before they have a chance to think about it. Now, there are a lot of other things going on. It's a lot of emotion. True. Yeah. But you got to be in control of emotion also. So you got to think, well, life isn't so easy. There's a lot of aggravation in life. True. Nobody says not. We go through mood swings all the time, probably 75 an hour or more. Up and down, up and down. It's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's worse, this, that. All the time. Very good. Still have to be in control. Yeah, can't lose it. I mean, within reason. But it's hard. Day in and day out. Person gets sledgehammered. I get it. but a knee-jerk reaction doesn't solve anything. Maybe it makes them feel better. Maybe, any psychologist will say, a person's angry, you got to get it out, you got to figure out a way how to get it out, and do it in a positive way, and whatever, just like, let it rip. Okay, what did I say? Hold that in some ways. Depends what a person's going to say, what they're going to do. Okay. But at the same time, you got to be rational. See, animals aren't rational, they just act. Yeah, they just act based on what their nature tells them to do. Man has a major advantage. Major advantage. We could do like animals do, 100%. We can totally react, right? We can totally react just like them and do what our instinct tells them, right? The only problem is what your instinct tells you doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. And that's a hard thing. That is a hard thing because your inner self will tell you this person deserves this. And they deserve that to be said to them and this to be said to them. Now, it may be true. It may be true, but in the bigger scheme of things, that has other ramifications. And those ramifications come back and bite you. Because even, sometimes you want to hit someone upside the head and say, listen, what you're doing over here is wrong, and this is wrong, and this, but sometimes you got to be more sensitive. And the reason you got to be more sensitive because it's a bigger picture. Not always, right? But someone say it doesn't matter. I don't care what the repercussions are. This is what my gut tells me that I should do. Yeah. The question is that the right thing to do? That's the question, right? Why? Because it says what your gut is telling you is not biased in so many different ways, and you're hearing things or even seeing things that are not necessarily what the reality is. In other words, you think that's the reality, but you're biased because you're hearing certain things. Okay. Mentioned in my class last night on Pirkei Avos. Someone can say, I always say two things I can't stand. One is that people misrepresent things, and two, that people lie. Somewhat similar things. So I'd be happy if people don't give me Webster's 8 definition. Say, wow, I really think Judaism is like this, and this is like that, and this is like the other. Just tell me I don't want to be inconvenienced. That's all you have to say. Don't give me mumbo jumbo garbage, right? Just forget it. Tell me I don't want to be inconvenienced. That's someone finally over a long period of time. They say, if I tell you I don't want to be inconvenienced, we'd be happy. I said, yeah, just admit it. That's all you have to do. Just admit it. Don't give me, I think this, I think that. You don't. You never looked into Judaism. You're not interested in looking at Judaism. It's not like you're going to say, well, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. It's true in this way, not true in that way. And philosophically, no, just tell me you don't want to be inconvenienced. Because you're not going to give me these other arguments. And they're like, you're right. Okay, good. Just admit it. Doesn't change anything, but at least they admit it. Right? So I mentioned another case. Another case. I asked somebody, is this really what you think is best for the person, or you just don't want to be inconvenienced? Yeah. So I was like, yeah, it's a little bit of both. No, it's not a little bit of both. It's like 20%, you're looking out for the interest of somebody. It's 80%, you don't want to be inconvenienced. I get it. I understand. End of life issues are never easy. And it comes with a lot of different things. Okay. But at least just admit, be much happier. Probably should have called them on it, but whatever. Just admit I don't want to be inconvenienced. That's what it's all about. Don't make it like care so much. Don't make yourself to be a martyr, right? Like I really care so much. No, you don't want to be inconvenienced. Period. You don't want to be inconvenienced. Okay, right? Just say it. Don't beat around the bush. Don't say, it's partially this, partially that. It's not, right? 100%. It's not that way. I'd just be happier if people would do that. That would end the conversation. Instead of like, okay, I have to call you on this. I have to call you on that. I have to call you on, I have to call you on the other thing. To call you on so many different things, just admit it. And don't give me, bad information. Just admit this is the way it is. And that's the reality. Yeah, that's all you have to do. Right? Make my life many ways a lot easier. But at the end of the day, what do you have to do over here? We got to be careful what we say. We got to be careful how we do things. We got to be careful how we react. Yeah, and that's not easy. That 100% is not easy because we're all full of emotion. And it could be a certain situation's got out of hand, right? It's gone on for a long time. And a person doesn't want to deal with it. And a person's sick of it, let's say. So what happens after a certain point of time? You try and be nice, you try and this, you try that, and what happens? What happens? You can't take it anymore, right? And you flip your lid. The person's like, what are you getting so upset about? Whatever. But the thing's gone on for a long period of time. So again, any of these things in general are not easy, right? I'm not a psychologist. I didn't play one on TV. They're not, these things are not easy, in general to deal with, but we have to be in control of how we react. That's what we can control. We're not out of control to the extent where, we're like animals and that we're just going to react whatever our nature tells us. And if someone, and if someone says something for whatever reason, we're just going to try and buck them, right? Animals chase after you because they get annoyed, We're not like animals in that sense. We have the ability to make decisions. We have the ability to answer things. We have the ability to do the right thing in the right way. But again, we have our biases. Things go on for a long period of time. A person gets sick of the situation and they lash out. So we got to work on not lashing out. It's not, again, it's not an easy thing. It's for sure not an easy thing. Right? Sometimes I play the game for a certain amount of time, and sometimes you just get fed up. You don't want to play the game anymore. You're like, oh, so what are you getting so upset about? What do you mean? This is a buildup of months, of years. And finally, once the blue moon, you finally say something. But you got to be in control of that also. Not, everything we're saying now is a lot easier said than done. A lot easier said than done. It's not easy by any stretch, right? By any stretch. But we all have what to work on over here. Somebody asked, let me take some questions here. Is it possible for this to happen with kosher food or rabbinic supervision? The rabbis bless the food they oversee. No, they don't bless it. They're just telling you what's in it is kosher. Yeah. Now, you could have kosher food, right? You could have kosher food where when we talk about the Arizal, Revive the Gloria, or bless the memory, eating something and the soul's going to get fixed up by him making a proper blessing on it, and the soul gets its final, reparation. We're not talking about treifir. Yeah, he's talking about apples, other things that are kosher. So can there be what would I call, spiritual cooties, like na. Can there be spiritual cooties in kosher food? Once the answer, yes. It can affect you in a negative way. But you say you'll never know. Very good. I agree with you. You'll never know. So if you'll never know, how can you fight against it? That's a hard thing. That's exactly what the Or Chaim HaKadosh here is saying. He's saying that your soul feels it. Your soul feels like the script has been flipped, but the soul doesn't know why. So he's giving you two possible explanations why. Yeah. Yeah. So, it doesn't have to be, a creepy, crawly thing or whatever that has a negative effect. That'd be obvious. Even something kosher, right? Even with proper rabbinic supervision, right? So, there's a myth out there, by rabbinic supervision, rabbi, blesses the food. He doesn't bless the food. The only time there's a blessing made is when, let's say, a ritual slaughters an animal. He makes the blessing, one blessing, even if he slaughters, let's say, 60 cows. He makes one blessing altogether on all the cows he's going to slaughter. And then they make a blessing when they cover the blood. Sorry, when they cover the blood on these type of animals. Yeah. For that they make a blessing also. Yeah, but that's it. You don't have a blessing. You don't have a blessing on food that any rabbi would make, to make it kosher. What the rabbinic supervision whatever the hechsher is telling you is everything in it is kosher according to kashrut standards. All these chemicals or whatever. That's why they have chemists. They pay chemists for this. To look into it to make sure these things are not derived from anything, non-kosher, right? The M&Ms for years weren't kosher. Why weren't they kosher? Because the red dye they used. I won't get gross there, but the red dye they used was from a red ant. I told someone this years ago, many years ago, secular Jew. They're like, They're like, no way. I'm like, go look it up. Go look it up. It's well known. Very well known. Crushed up red ants. They're like, oh, we don't eat bugs. We don't. Yeah. That's something processed. Yeah. Take fresh broccoli. Take fresh cauliflower. Yeah. It's like Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Yeah. It's infested. Totally infested. Very, very hard to check. Very, very hard to check. Yeah. Secular people wouldn't even think of checking it for bugs. They wouldn't even think of checking it for bugs, but they're for sure eating bugs. Nothing to talk about. All right, nothing to talk about. They're like, oh, I never eat bugs. Okay. There are things that are infested. They eat. Someone eats figs. Very hard to check. Yeah, why are they very hard to check? Because the worm inside the fig is the same color as the fig itself. I'm not saying you can't check. It's very hard to check. It is possible to check. Yeah, but for that reason, I wouldn't touch figs for that, exactly for that reason. Now, most people are not going to check figs for bugs, for worms. They're just going to eat them. Very good. And it's no question. I mean, there are things known to be infested. Period. They are known to be infested. You can't say, well, not true, things have changed. They're known to be infested for years. Yeah, there are people that are experts in bugs in food. They're experts. Okay, go argue with an expert. Yeah. Now you want to eat. You want to sit there and check a whole fig when you know that the worms are the same color as what's in as as the thing as the fig itself on the inside. So you say you can probably get them out if you have bright light. You put them in soapy water. You do other okay. Yeah, but if you don't check, you for sure eating bugs. Like there's there's nothing to talk about. So for Jews, that'll affect you in a negative way. For a non-Jew, it won't affect you. Right? It won't have that effect. But even so, right? Even so, it's the biggest misnomer in the world. Oh, we don't eat bugs. We don't eat bugs. Of course you eat bugs. You never check for bugs. Now, some things you don't have to check. Right? Rice in general, certainly in the States, you don't have to check. I mean, we did find bugs in general. Even in rice, we don't have to check. But in general, you don't have to check. A lot of fruits and vegetables, you don't have to check, but there are plenty of things you do. And if you see something that looks like there's a hole in it, you got to cut it open. Right? Or if you see a web around something, you got to check it. Yeah. But, yeah, ask somebody. They'll never say they eat bugs. Never. Right? They say, no, it's only something that's old, something that's rotten, or something's going bad. No. It doesn't have to be going bad. There are things that are pretty infested. Infested means infested means you're not going to get them out. Period. That's not going to happen. Right? It's too hard to check. Yeah, let me take some other questions here. Should someone listen to advice from someone who says one thing but chooses to do the opposite? Yeah, that's a big question. Good. You ask a lot of good questions. I would say it depends. I heard someone once say, let's say someone is a big expert in child education. They're a big expert in child education, but they got a number of their kids messed up. So someone once said, why would I listen to what this person says if his own kids don't come out the right way? Now, there is more to be said for that. Right? There is more to be said for that. A person can say, well, do as I say, not as I do, but we're supposed to be role models, right? Parents are supposed to be role models for their kids. True. Right? So we're our own worst enemy. So kids see right through us in general. We say one thing, maybe do something else. You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful, but that is a good question. If someone, Bertrand Russell, right? Very good example. Right? Taught at my alma mater at Columbia that he taught ethics, but he was totally unethical. Right? So they asked him, How could you teach ethics and be totally unethical? And he said, if I taught mathematics, expect me to be a square, right? So, okay. Aristotle, big time womanizer, did other things. People are going to swear by his philosophy, by what he does, by his other actions. Lahavdil, we'll make a big distinction here between the holy and the profane, certainly. Professional athletes, movie stars. They're gonna, you're not necessarily gonna listen to what they say. You probably care less what they have to say. But you can say, what do I care what they have to say? I care how they act. I care how they throw a ball, or kick a ball, or hit a ball. That's all I care about. I don't care about what they do. I don't know. Isn't that a contradiction? You're going to pay money to support them, in some ways because you enjoy what they do, but, what they do in their private life you don't care about. So, yeah, I would think this is a problem. Again, it doesn't mean people are perfect. Yeah. But at the same time, the do as I say, not as I do attitude, yeah, it's a good question. Would you want to take advice from such a person? Right? What's the answer? Probably not. Right? Probably not. That's going to be hard. That for sure is going to be hard because why should you take what this person says seriously if they themselves don't do it? Right? Give me a famous example. Rabbi's told this story many times on a boat, and someone gave a lecture about smoking. This is before it really came out smoking was bad. And so he gave all these stats and different things how bad it was and how it's going to shorten your life. After he spoke, 10 minutes later, he lights up a cigarette. So Rabbi asked him, "My, what's going on? How can you give this whole lecture and say it's so bad to smoke and you yourself smoke?" He goes, "You're right. It's going to take years off my life. I enjoy it so much I can't stop. It's so good. I know it's going to kill me. I know it's going to take years out of my life, but I'm not willing to give it up." Okay. But you just took his whole medical career and threw it in the toilet. Yeah. Yeah, you gotta take anything this guy says seriously. Yeah, I mean, listen. Let's say the medicine backs up what he says. Let's say the stats back up what he says. Very good. So then you're telling everyone it's bad and yourself do it. You want to take advice from such a person? The person can know what they're doing in medicine. They can save lives. Let's say. But you want to get advice from them? It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it depends what type of advice. If it's unbiased advice, and it's something that's going to help you, whatever, because they do other things, doesn't mean you can't listen to it per se, right? But if they're bad in that same field and they don't take their own advice, yeah, that's people would say that's a problem. That is a problem. That's why you got a serious problem where you have rabbis that contradict things, in the Torah. It could have a large following, right? Let's say. And they say all kinds of things that go against Torah. Okay. Well, they're supposed to believe in God. They're supposed to believe in Torah, right? So if they're supposed to believe in, I'm not talking about Reform and conservative rabbis. That's for sure you don't have to listen to. You have an obligation not to listen to, right? But here you're talking about, let's say, quote unquote, Orthodox rabbi. Yeah. So how can they do things that go against what the Torah says? Good. How can they promote things that go against Torah? Good. So why do you listen to them? That's a good point. Who says you should listen to them? Right? They're a bunch of frauds. They're going to give you Webster's 8th definition why homosexuality is okay and why it only meant this and only meant that, and we can support it, and we can be LGBTQ and go in their parade. Well, I wouldn't listen to a word the person says. That's problematic. Yeah. So yeah, that would be problematic. I would agree. Someone supports a group or idea or a nation, and the nation does something that inherently sins against God. Okay. What should happen to the person who support them? Depends on what level of support. In other words, if you're giving them money and you're helping them, that's what we call Messiah with the Varavera. You're helping someone who sins. Giving to LGBTQ, that's a good one, right? It goes against everything we stand for, but you support it, not you. Somebody supports it. Yeah? How can they support it? They can't, right? Let's say better. That's something you can't support, right? Right? So how could you support a group, a nation, whatever that things go against the Torah? Yeah, I'll make it a little more graphic. Someone asked last week in a Q&A about voting, right? Throw in the state, should a person vote? Yeah, it should vote. Now, who are you going to vote for? You're going to try and vote for the most moral person, which they're all immoral in general, right? But either the most moral person or, the person's going to be, best for the Jewish people in Israel. That's what you're going to vote for. Now, again, you're not going to go by party lines because party lines don't really matter. You can have a Republican that's no different than a Democrat, so to speak. I mean, they're more traditional in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So they can be more pro-Israel, less pro-Israel, but you want to find the best person, right? It's going to fit it's going to fit your values and the values of Torah, right? So now, can you support something that goes against your values? Well, you just answer the question. If they go against your values, let's say better. If they go against the values of Torah, how can you support them? Yeah, it's a big problem. Right? Especially if they choose to avoid the truth. Yeah, people, fork tongue. They say all kinds of things, but they don't say what they mean. They want, you can't pin them down. You get, there's some people were saying about this guy was running for mayor of New York, right? They kept trying to pin him down to come out against Hamas. Yeah, to denounce Hamas as a terrorist organization. And guess what? He wouldn't do it. Yeah. Yeah, so they speak in forked tongues. They speak around the issue, they don't speak about the issue. You put them up against the wall, they won't answer. So that non-answer or beating around the bush means no. They're not going to condemn them. That's what it means. Right? That's what it means. Yeah, so yeah, you try and get an answer out of them. Right? But and try and see exactly where they're holding. But yeah, that would be a contradiction in terms. How are you going to support someone that goes against Torah? Now, again, it depends what it is. But in general, if it's something basic in Torah, you can't support them. There's no, so my Rebbe would say, you shouldn't vote in the Israeli elections. Have nothing to do with the government. But if you're not in the government, it's going to make things worse, and you got more of a bigger say or whatever. Okay, but the problem is when they do things wrong and behind your back, even though this desecration of Shabbos, you just bring down the government. How can you sit there and you're Messiah with the Varavera? You're helping people sin. You're not telling people to desecrate Shabbos. And it's much better. They're in the government than not in the government. Everyone would agree, right? Certainly, I shouldn't say everyone. Most people would agree, because otherwise it would be worse here in Israel. True, that's 100% true. But at the same time, you are sanctioning what they're doing behind your back, and you're just not bringing down the government, right? Now, what's the reason you're not bringing down the government? How can you say desecration of Shabbos is okay? You can't say that. You can't allow that. 100%, you can't allow that. So what happens? Yeah. So there must be either getting kickback somewhere else or there's something else going on. Yeah. But they are saying what they're doing is okay. If they say, no, we're not, we're trying to prevent worse things. So if that happens, it's not in our control. I don't know. You're part of the government, right? You are helping other people sin. You're giving your stamp of approval, period. Right now, the vast majority of rabbinic authorities would hold out that way. They'll say they're under duress. They have no choice but to be there, otherwise it'd be 10 times worse. Right? So therefore they have to have a say. Therefore they have to have political parties. Okay. That's the majority of people, but keep in mind. They are, indirectly saying what's going on is okay. Because otherwise, if desecration of Shabbos is going on, then they should bring down the government. Why don't they bring down the government? You see that, bunch of, not going to get into politics, but if your religious party's left because of what's going on with the draft law, okay. And how they're going to try and draft yeshiva students. I'm not, going into detail about this, but yeah, so that's much more of an issue. Desecrated Shabbos going on behind their back. So they pick their issues. But how can you sit with other people knowing that, they're doing this? Yeah. So again, the ends, they'll say, And their rabbis will say the ends justify the means. Why? Because otherwise it'd be 10 times worse. True. Right? That is true. But at the same time, indirectly, you're saying what they do is okay. Right? That's what my Rebbe would say. Again, it's a minority opinion. Right? It's a minority opinion. It doesn't really matter. The other side is much, many more people for that side. Makes sense. Right? Logically, it makes sense, but you don't get out of the problem. You don't get out of the problem. They're saying, well, we're not talking this great Shabbos, but what's going on. 100% it's going on. So it's like you have a hand in it. And the other side will say, no, we're not in control of that. But you're sitting there with people that are. Yeah. So then the question is, biblically considered nations Canaan and Sim. We're going to get to Canaan in the next verse. I don't know when, but we'll get there. Was commanded to happen to them, right? We're also rotating the ideas of shifted. So what's the punishment for supporting? What's the punishment? Good question. A person, celebrates immoral behavior. Does that mean, notating, does that mean as if they did it? So I'll tell you a scary proposition. Scary proposition is if a person hangs out with the wrong crowd, they themselves don't do anything wrong. They could get punished for what that wrong crowd does based on association. So that's the answer. In other words, even if you don't do the action, that's why I call it a scary proposition. Even if they themselves don't do the action, what happened? What happened was they didn't do the act. They didn't do anything wrong, but the people around them did. If the people around them did something wrong, and they're still there hanging out, they're guilty by association. Right? We'll make it very simple. Bank robbery. Yeah. One person's job is to be the driver. Yeah. Let's say he's the driver. Yeah. They get caught. The person didn't steal anything. So I was just a driver. Or even better, someone got rounded up and he said, I was a lookout person. Okay, you're an accomplice. But you didn't do anything wrong, technically. You didn't steal anything, you didn't kill anyone, you didn't injure anyone, but you're guilty by association. So if a person says, LGBTQ is a good example. They say, well, I support anyone, who feels that's right for them. Well, you can't support them. Doesn't matter if you're straight, right? And you're okay. That doesn't matter. The fact is, by saying, I support this, it means you support people who go against the Torah. That you can't do. That is forbidden. Right? You run into problems, let's say, a person gets married, right? Yeah, a person, and it's come up a number of times. People have told me they work for whatever, a certain company, whatever it is. The company gets married. They're just getting married to the same-sex person. Yeah. They want you to say mazel tov, whatever. So you got a problem. You can't say mazel tov to them. You have to explain, this is what you want to do. That's your choice, but I can't support it. You might run into problems that way, but you can't say you support it. You cannot say you support it. You're guilty by association. Even if you say, I don't hold of it, and I'm straight and I do this and whatever, that's great. But if you say you support it, right, then you're in trouble. Yeah, even if you don't act on it, it doesn't matter. Even if you think it's wrong, right? But if you say, well, I support this group and they have a right to do what they want, that's a problem. Even if you yourself don't, that's a huge problem. How can you support it? You have no ability to support it here. It's forbidden. It's a total prohibition. A person's going to say, well, I support people that have extramarital affairs. I support Ganavim, people who steal. Yeah, I support people who eat treif. Can't say that. Even if you don't do it, it doesn't matter. You got to come out against it. You can't say you support it because you're guilty by association. Doesn't mean you yourself are doing it. Guilty by association means you're giving credibility to something that goes against the Torah. You can't do that. Even if you don't do anything, you can't do that. Just being around these people. If they're doing bad things, you can't be around them. I didn't do anything wrong. You're right. But you're guilty by association. Someone belittles another. Okay. How can the abuser request any respect, honor, blessing, sympathy for anyone who witnessed said sin towards the aggressor? How could you? Yeah. Again, answer your own question. Right? That's the answer. If someone belittles another for any reason. Yeah. How can they request any respect, honor? The only way they could do it is if they apologize. If they apologize, the other person accepts their apology. Very good. So then they got a clean slate, right? But if they do things wrong to somebody, they abuse somebody, they make fun of somebody, whatever it is, and they don't think there's a problem with it. Or maybe they're going to say the person's too sensitive, right? They're oversensitive. Okay. They don't even want to say that. They made fun of someone, they belittled them, very good. Right? How can they deserve honor? They can, people can say things and do things that don't make any sense. I mean, you live in that world. We all, I shouldn't say you, we all live in that world. There are people who do things and say, I deserve this or I deserve that, when their actions don't manifest that. Right? If a person is brought down that if a person is looking for honor, honor will never find them. If you're looking for honor. The person that's not looking for honor, people will honor them. As if you're not looking for it. If you're looking for it, you'll never get it. Right? But who says they should get it? That's the answer. How could they expect? I mean, you want me to go in their psyche? They're stupid. They're gonna say, I deserve this, I deserve that, and these accolades and that accolades, but you squash people and you make fun of people. They can demand whatever they want, doesn't mean they're normal. Doesn't mean it makes any sense. Right? I mean, it'd be very easy to answer for them. Yeah, I mean, I don't normally answer these type of questions, but in general, what could they say? Who cares what I did? What difference does it make? I made fun of them. I just donated $500,000 to this show. I deserve honor. They could say that. 100% they could say that with a straight face. So what, I did this? What does that have to do with anything? I deserve this. They can easily say that. I'm not saying it's right. It's warped. It's totally warped. They can demand anything. Doesn't mean they have a right to. They can think whatever they want. But, anyone who saw it should never give them honor. Yeah. It's kind of a problem. People have power, right? Seemingly have power, and they do underhanded things. They still get honor. People still, I know somebody like that, and people are afraid of this person. They're afraid because it caused so many problems. So they don't want to come out against them. They were afraid. So therefore, I'm not saying in all cases, but let's say you have a case where the person got power, caused all kinds of problems. Because it caused all kinds of problems, no one wants to stand up to them. So that's why. So even if it comes to a certain place, they'll give it honor. Why? Out of fear. Out of fear, they don't want to get messed up. I remember, someone, in Kasher said, non-religious Jews to watch wine, which is a big problem, huge problem, right? If they don't keep Shabbos, yeah. So so I called it, and I go as far as I should have, but nonetheless, I had a number of people say, "Well, we back what you did. We just can't say it, outright." It's like it's like another famous Three Stooges thing. It's like, who's going to volunteer for this? And two of them stand backwards, take 2 steps backwards. They got one that's stuck. So, oh, good, we got to volunteer, right? So like they'll say, yeah, we're right behind you, but we can't come out. We cannot back you publicly. Kind of like a backhanded, compliment. We'll say what you did is the right thing. There's no doubt what you did the right thing. But we can't back you publicly. I'm like, you don't think there's a problem? Someone selling non-kosher wine? And it's got proper rabbinic supervision on it, they're selling it all over the world? That shouldn't be called in? They said, no, you had a right to do that. We just can't support you publicly because the person's a menace. And they're afraid. They're afraid what this person can do. Okay. So that can happen. That for sure can happen. People are afraid of this person. So, I mean, one possibility. Again, it's my answer no better than anyone else's there, right? Just getting the psyche of a person, right? Why would they deserve honor? Because they deserve honor for whatever they've done. So what if they did this and they did the other thing? If it's something so reprehensible, no one's going to honor them. They'll be disgraced. Okay, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about an easy case. No, we're not talking about that case. We're talking about a case where people are still going to honor them. If it's something they get totally disgraced from, yeah, then no one's going to honor them. Very good. Right? Very good. How could the aggressor even consider they get to determine what the outcome should be? Because they got power. Right? They got power. So if they get power, they can demand whatever they want. Especially if they have money. There's an old saying. Balamea Baladea. Person has 100 people want to hear what they have to say. Well, I care what they have to say. EF Hut, right? I have to care what they have to say because the guy's got millions in the bank and he's who knows what, but they have power, right? Right? So, the aggressor could try and squash any of the rumors or whatever and put fear into people. Yeah, and say you go against me, like this will happen or that'll happen or who knows what. But because he got power. That's the only reason. If he didn't have power, then yeah. They're not gonna care. Or people weren't afraid of them, they also wouldn't care. Right? They would care less. They'd squash them like a grape. If they could. But if this aggressor has power, they're not gonna want to go against him. Makes perfect sense. Right? Shouldn't the witness hold them accountable? You're right. They should be held accountable. But what if they're afraid of the repercussions? What if they're afraid, not to say for their life, but they could ruin them in different ways? What if that's the case? What if they're afraid of the future? They can be afraid of the future because this person has connections. This person could ruin them, let's say. So they're afraid of what they could do. But you're 100% right. Shouldn't they bring them down? They should. They should. What happened when I called it and I got fired from my job? And I was stuck in a country. I didn't speak the language and I couldn't do anything there. And that's a good way to squash any opposition to anything. You get fired. Then what? Now you got no way to make money. You're in a foreign country. Then what do you do? Right? So, I got out of it, but it wasn't pretty. It certainly wasn't pretty, but I'll say, okay. I had to sign an affidavit. Not an affidavit, I had to sign something where they owed me money, right? They owed me money. They owed me severance pay. Yeah, they owed me severance pay. So they said the only way you're going to get severance pay, again, this quote unquote from person, right? Religious person. Religious quote unquote Orthodox Jew. Yeah. Yeah. So they wanted me to sign a statement saying that I only get compensated. The person who's funding the school will only compensate if I sign a document saying I won't speak about any rabbis in the community. So what do you call that in the vernacular? You know what you call that? You call that extortion. That's extortion. That's exactly what I said. It's extortion. He said, it doesn't matter. You're not getting paid otherwise. So I took the thing and threw it in his face. I walked out. So I called up my rabbi. I said, what do I do? I said, now I'm stuck. They refuse to pay. They want me to sign this document that I won't come out against any other rabbis in the community. Yeah. Otherwise, they won't pay me. He's like, all right, you got to leave. I said, okay, so tell me. I said, tell me what. I said, what should I do? So he told me, go in front of two witnesses. Tell two people that if you can ever take them to court, you'll take them to court. But you're going to sign under duress. It's called the Motzeh Modah. You're signing this document under duress, right? You're signing this document under duress. And if you go after them, you go after them. But you say in front of two witnesses. That's the only reason why you're signing. That's the only reason why you're signing. So I told this person off, and I signed. Yeah, so I got compensated. Yeah, then I left the country. They got me out of the country, VIP. Got me right out of the country. But that's extortion. That is extortion. Now, somebody was lying, obviously, because this person who was in kashrus, said, it's draining my blood, and all these different things, all this lashon hara against me, whatever. And so I never got money from this. I wasn't making money from this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This other person says, what are you doing? You're taking away parnasa from someone. Now, obviously, somebody's lying. Yeah. Somebody's obviously lying. Now, this is extortion at its best. I mean, maybe not at its best, but this is extortion. 100%. Right? 100%. This is extortion. Yeah. Now, that being said, you're asking, shouldn't they be held accountable? Shouldn't these people be held accountable? Yeah. So what I did was I warned anybody who saw rabbinical supervision on wine coming out of Chile not to touch it. Yeah. I didn't go as far as I could have. I should have. Should have brought this person down. No tomorrow. But this person, when there was somebody there that wasn't religious at the time, they're religious now. I mean, probably still religious. Who he was there watching the wine as a secular Jew. That's a big problem. Big problem. So this person got shook down. This quote unquote rabbi shook him down. It's like, right, you were keeping Shabbos when you were there, right. Shook him down. Yeah, it scared him. Yeah, and then this guy came to me. And he said, I'm angry with you. I said, I know why you're angry with me, but I had every right to do it. You never should have been there in the first place. Yeah. But I paid the price. I paid the price. But at the end of the day, is that what should have been done? Now, did I think it was going to cost me my job? No. Not necessarily. Right? But he told me that my everything is what you have to do. You cannot have someone selling this stuff and making and telling people it's kosher when it's not. It's a very serious thing. You're playing with kashrus. So now, person will ask, but if you keep Torah mitzvahs, you never lose. You never lose. Okay. Yeah. So this is corrupt. So I had to leave the country. Okay. I thought I'd be there longer, but okay. And I'm going to the States, and that's how I got involved in what I'm doing now. But God has his ways. God has his ways, but you never lose. You never lose listening to Das Torah. It might not come out the way you think, right? Listening to what a rabbi says may never be easy, but you don't lose. Even if it's hard, you might not get the reaction you want. Again, might be told me many things, and family-wise cause a lot of problems. Yeah? Okay, but there's no way around certain things. There's nothing to do. The only question is how much damage control. So he didn't come out smelling like a rose, but he told me what to do. And I listened for the most part. For the most part. Yeah. Just about everything. Yeah. It wasn't pretty. By any stretch, it wasn't pretty. Yeah, but you don't lose. Because, I lost my job there. Okay. That opened up other doors. Open up different things. Okay. But at the end of the day, again, is Torah true or it's not true? If it's true, there are times. I'll give an example. A lot of people probably learning the laws of lashon hara right now. That's why the temple was destroyed. So the Chofetz Chaim says that you got a job and someone did something and you know who did it. And the boss comes to you and says, give me the information. And you're not allowed to give the information to lashon hara. Yeah. So the boss says, give me the information. Say no. The boss says, listen, I need this information. I know you have the information. If you don't give me the information, you're fired. I'm going to fire you. So what does the Chofetz Chaim say? Got to lose your job. You're not allowed to give over the information, right? In the case where it's forbidden, you're not allowed to give over information. And the Chofetz Chaim says, even if you have to go collecting door to door, even as embarrassing as that would be, and you have no food to eat, and you barely have a roof over your head. Says the Chofetz Chaim, because of the severity of Lashon Hara, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to give over the information. You have to lose your job. Forget about, it's discrimination, it's this. Forget it. You have to lose your job, period. You're not allowed to give over the information. They're going to say, but keeping the Torah is always good. Keeping the Torah, you never lose. So how could you lose your job? How in the world could you lose your job? Because that's what God wants. That's also part of the test. Are you going to keep the Torah under all circumstances or not? You can say, this is a very hard test. Maybe I'll just give over the information. I'll keep my job. Maybe I'll get a promotion. Maybe, I'll get better money. I'll get a better office. I don't know. Whatever it is. I'll get a bigger office. Who knows? Yeah, if I give over the information, I'm a team player. Boss sees I'm a team player, so I gave over the information. I got someone else fired or who knows what. No. But that's part of the test. That's a clear halacha, by the way. That's not just one opinion. That is the clear halacha. You would have to give up your job for that. Yeah? The Torah says you never lose. Okay, but, this is it. That's not called a loss. That's called, keeping what the Torah says. We don't look at it as a loss. And he says, even if you have to go door to door, you have no money. It's embarrassing to have to go door to door. Groveling for a couple kopecks or whatever to make ends meet. Very embarrassing. Says the Chofetz Chaim, that's all. That doesn't change. So you don't lose. Right? Even if it looks like you lose, you don't lose. Because you stood up for Torah. And what happens in your case, you didn't stand up for Torah, you were in serious trouble. Serious trouble. Like my Rebbe would say, sometimes you got to protest. If you don't protest, it's like you agree. Even if no one's going to listen. Now, some rabbinic authorities today would say, no, that's not the way, right? Or even in previous generations, that's not the way. Antagonize people, other things, it doesn't do anything. Okay, but, Chazon Ish didn't say that, the Brisker Rav didn't say that, Shabbat Rav didn't say, they're like big rabbinic authorities, previous generations, that didn't say that. They said, yeah, you're going to be out there protesting, even if no one's going to listen. I remember once I was my Rebbe protested against all the Russians coming into Israel, and in the Ministry of Interior knew the Ministry of Interior at that time was being run by Orthodox Jews, and they knew all these Russians were non-Jews. They knew that, so my Rebbe protested against it. So I asked him tongue in cheek. I said, you really think it did anything? You really think it's going to change anything? He says, listen, I'm not going to get upstairs after 120 years after I die. God's going to say, hey, Moshe, why don't you protest over here? You knew what was going on. You didn't say anything. So it's like you agree. Brisker Rav said that. Yeah, Brisker Rav held that very strong. Chazon Ish held that very strong. Yeah, but he told me, now, question what the connection is here, without getting into politics. He said, this is the reason why we have a problem with the Arabs. I said, what's the connection? He said, if there's ever a war or a civil war, these Russians are going. They're not Jews. Yeah, which side do you think they're going to go on? He said, it's like you're bringing in these people to offset the Orthodox. That's what they said also. Yeah, that's what the secular, that's what the government said as well. They were bringing, they knew there were non-Jews coming in. But they brought them in. Why'd they bring them in? Why'd they bring in so many? Yeah, to offset Orthodox Jews. He said it literally. It's, this is not even something you have to look for, even a fact check. They're like, those are the facts. Those are the facts. So he said, you got a whole nother pillar of people that are going to join the other side, and they brought them in. That's why you have to protest. That's why you have problems with the Arabs, because it's not the only reason. But what's going to happen is they are going to bring, they're going to go on that side, and they're going to fight against you, and you're bringing them in to fight against you. And you knew that as an Orthodox Jew. He said, that's why I protested, even if no one else is going to listen. Yeah, sometimes you have to do that. Right, 100%. Sometimes you have to do that. So when it says awful hard to do it when another person pushes your button, you're right. No, that's the hardest thing. That is the hardest thing because they get under your skin. Sometimes people out there, you want to squash like a fly. They just bother you so much. You just want to whap them. Shake them up a little bit. Well, yeah, They also know how to push your buttons, but you have to know not how to push back, but you have to know how to be in control. And that's you're right. So as we always say part of changing bad character traits is what? Is knowing what triggers it. So if you know someone's going to pull the trigger or push a trigger, so to speak, if that is the case and they're going to push the trigger, you have to know how to answer. You have to know how you're going to react. In other words, you might have to role play. Might have to work on it 100 times or 1,000 times. Person says X, what are you going to answer? And what if they answer like this? Or what if they say like this? Yeah, because you have to know what the trigger is, right? Once you know what the trigger is, what they could trigger, what they could say, then you have to know how to counteract it. Someone asked, why is protein powder kosher when it's made from crushed worms? Even if it's made from crushed worms, doesn't matter because it's not full worms. You're not eating a full worm. So the prohibition of eating a bug, even if that would be the case, it's not a whole bug. Eating a whole bug is forbidden. 100% forbidden, 5 or 6 prohibitions. If it's crushed up, no prohibition. Right? No prohibition. Now, the question is, what if they know the bug is already in there? Right? So normally we say there's a kashrus dictum that says, you're not allowed to nullify something that's forbidden at the outset. Meaning, if I know there's a full bug in there, right? And I see it. Well, it's dead. Let's make it easy. It's dead. Yeah, you see it in there, and so what do? You grind it up. That's a problem. It only works if you don't know what's in there. But everyone said, I don't know if 100% who's joking or not, right, about strawberries and how, this is years ago, and strawberries are already known to be infested. So he said, if you don't, if you're worried about it being infested, so put it in a blender. Put it in a blender. You grind it up. Yeah, and if you grind it up, not a problem, you can drink it. You can say, oh, it's gross, this and that. Okay, but it's not a full bug. You grind it up. So I asked him this principle. I asked him, how are you allowed to do that? You shouldn't be allowed to do that. You're nullifying something that's forbidden at the outset. You're not allowed to do that. The only way you'd be allowed to do it is if you didn't know it was there. So you want to tell me, in these strawberries, you don't know there are bugs there. Let's say, and you grind them up and you find some, okay. But if you don't know they're there, good. But if you know they're there, so I want to take broccoli. Broccoli, good example. I want to make, I don't know, broccoli tea. I want to grind it up, right? Make it into soup, even better, right? But you know for sure there are bugs in there. It's infested, known to be infested. Yeah, 100%. You know they're there. How can you do that? Again, I'm not saying can't say 100%. That's really what he meant. But what he said was that if you grind it up, what's the problem? High in protein. So could be he was only joking. Could be. Right? But again, the question is going to be if you know it's there. If you know it's there and you grind it up, it should be problematic. Should be problematic. But if not, and there's a doubt that it's there, then you can do it. Yeah, if you're telling me that everybody knows there are worms in there, and that's where it comes from, and that's where it comes from, I'm going to give rabbinic supervision to it. And again, it's probably because they're ground up. That's how they can do it, right? But I would think it's problematic if they know it's there. If there's a doubt it's there, that might be a different issue. Then you don't know 100%. Then you don't know 100%. If you know 100%, I would think it's problematic. But it could be what Rabbi said is fine. That is, that would be the case. So when it says soak it in baking soda, again, even if it's there, the problem is if they're saying that it's there, and they are 100% making it from that, and they know that it's there, how can it be permissible? How can it be permissible? Right? I'll give another example, even not so much as a gross example, but almost similar. The soy, soy is like in 70% of everything you eat. Now, how do they get soy? This is whatever, many years ago, or 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe. How do they get soy? What do they do to get it so, be so strong, whatever. They inject something in the soybeans for it to grow very strong. What they inject in it? Part of a rat. Now, if you say that the main ingredient in soy that's making it strong, so to speak, it comes from a rat, we call that something that establishes the thing. We call it a maimed in kashrus terms. That's something that makes it strong, that establishes the main thing besides the bean itself. If that is the case, according to kashrus, something that has that status can never be nullified. Now, if it can never be nullified, and you have that rat in there, for protein or whatever part of the rat they use, I have no idea, but they use it for protein, there's a major problem. There is a major problem. The major problem is that soy is in 70% of everything you eat. It's in cakes, cereal, all kinds of things. It's in all kinds of things you eat. So if that would be the case, you would never be allowed to eat anything. Right? 70% of everything you eat, you're getting from rat protein, let's say. You say it's gross, whatever. Okay, but let's say that's the case. And it's never nullified. How can you eat? You won't be able to eat anything. Right? So I remember, so my wife once asked, and she happened to, ask my husband something about, I don't know, eating healthy, whatever. So she asked about soy stuff. And he said, "Oh, that's the worst thing you can eat." And this is what he said. So I asked him, so I said, obviously you have permissibility here, otherwise you won't be able to eat anything. He says you have to come on. There's another kashrus thing here. It's called zev zegorim. This and this cause it. So there are two opinions, according to the Gemara. There are two opinions. Zev zegorim is mutter or zev zegorim is asur. Either I say it's permissible if I put these two things together. Either I say it's permissible or I say it's forbidden. If I say it's forbidden, then you can't eat anything. Almost everything, which is 70% of all food is made out of soy. You can't eat anything, right? You can almost not eat anything. So you have to come on to the other side that zev zegorim is permissible. Because if you don't come on to that, you wouldn't be able to eat anything. So as we always say, if you know how certain things are made, then you wouldn't eat anything. I remember I used to sit with him, in the rabbinical court. So, and this is many years ago when whole controversy came out about wigs and idolatry and using hair from India. So someone from the head of kashrus comes running down in the same building. Comes running down, and he comes in and he gives testimony in front of the rabbis there, and he says, we just want everybody to know the human hair that we use in food, comes from Korea, because there's no problem, there's no problem of idolatry, and whatever. So we don't have a problem. I'm like, ew. I was like, you're telling me we eat human hair? I was like, come on, you guys don't think that's gross? So what are you putting in for? Like protein for other things? So one of the rabbis looked at me and says, "You want to know, Chaim, you want to know what was in you want to know what was in that candy bar you just ate?" I was like, come on, you guys don't care if we live or die. You just guys interested in making money, right? It's about money, right? They were laughing, like, human hair, seriously? So yeah, so small amount. I mean, obviously not a huge amount, but small amount of human hair goes in, I don't know, some foods, I don't know what foods, whatever, goes into some foods for what purpose? For protein. They use it for protein. I always say, if you knew how things were made, you would never eat anything. But found out certain things sitting there, I was like, well, so I was like, oh, so what about these emulsifiers? What about these other things in this candy bar? They're like, aha. So I was like, you don't care if we live or die, do you? It's all about money, right? They're like, get them out of here. It's bad propaganda. Like, get them out of here. Yeah. So yeah, there are. You'd be surprised. Be surprised what goes into what goes into what goes into food. But again, if it's something that's known, right, I would think it's more problematic. If you know 100% that there are worms in there are bugs in there, and you are crushing them up again. I don't, if you know they're there. If you don't know they're there, it's something else. Then if they get crushed up, they get crushed up. Happens, I'm sure, in falafel places, you get bugs around, whatever. You're grinding up chickpeas and bug can fly in there and gets ground up with it. Okay. So you eat it. You eat it. Is it forbidden? No, because it's crushed up. The only time it's going to be forbidden if it's intact, right? If it could be 5 or 6 prohibitions in one shot. Eating pig is only one prohibition. People think like eating pig is so much worse than eating, and eating other things. Bugs are worse. Bugs are 100% worse. Yeah. So if a person ate a full bug, right, it could be tiny. It doesn't matter. It could be a quarter of a half of a tenth of a millimeter. Doesn't really matter. If you ate one that was intact, totally intact, you ate a whole bug, 5 or 6 prohibitions. Right? Eating pig is only one. Yeah. I'm sure it's very appetizing. Let me see if there are any other questions here. Yeah, any other questions? Boy, interesting topics here. All right. I'm going to stop here. Next week there will be no class because it will be Tisha B'Av, so won't be a class next week. But we'll continue the week after. So, anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As. I think it's my father's Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman @gmail.com. Wish everyone good beginning.